Just like the other seasons before it, Alice in Borderland's third season is full of crazy deaths, so here are some of the absolute worst. Things got dark immediately when Dr. Ryuji got dragged into that initiation card game. What looked like a basic matching game turned into a straight-up execution chamber, where drawing the wrong card meant getting fried by cruel bolts of electricity. 2 players died within a matter of seconds, their bodies convulsing as the current tore through them. These deaths hit us out of nowhere because there was zero warning. Their lives ended because of a single, simple card flip, which basically summed up the entire season's message that sometimes pure chance kills you faster than any strategy ever could. The Temple Challenge turned into an absolute nightmare with those flaming arrows. Every wrong answer triggered waves of fire arrows that came down with zero mercy. People literally burned alive where they stood because the riddles were so obscure that even genius-level players had to rely on luck. We'll never be able to forget the scenes of flaming arrows piercing people's necks, chests, and even eyes. The randomness and gruesome nature made it worse than any usual bloodbath because no amount of preparation could save you when the rules were rigged from the start. But the zombie card game messed with people's heads way more than anything else. Players who drew the zombie card had zero choice but to spread infection through touch, basically condemning others whether they wanted to or not. The paranoia created the real casualties, though. People got so desperate to survive that they started killing allies just to slow the spread down. These deaths were brutal not only because they showed how fast cooperation falls apart when fear takes over, but it was also ultimately unnecessary, since Arisu figured out a way to save most of the players. Bodies kept piling up as a lack of trust became deadlier than actual zombies. That subway game put Usagi through absolute hell with poisoned air that turned every breath into a gamble. Although many survived the jump between trains, some didn't, and it's impossible to tell which fate is worse: slowly, painfully suffocating from the poison, or having that moment of excruciating torture of your body scraping against the rails until you die or are run over. Both are absolutely horrific ways to go, and some of the worst in the whole show. When the games hit their climax, death got even heavier. That final hall of doors revealed the system's cruelty completely. After enduring a hellish ordeal with multiple horrible deaths like falling to their deaths or being set on fire, the dice said only 7 survivors could pass, but Usagi's pregnancy meant an extra life nobody had planned for. Arisu chose to stay behind, thinking he was condemning himself to save Usagi and their unborn child. The agony came from that impossible choice between saving yourself and protecting the people you love. The cruelest twist came after, though. Arisu thought his sacrifice had saved everyone, only to find out survival wasn't guaranteed just because you followed the rules. Outside, flood swept everything away. As it was revealed, he was the true winner. Players who'd fought through every single trial got washed away by the current and drowned horribly under its grip. These deaths were some of the cruelest of the season because they betrayed hope itself. People had beaten the games only to die in the chaos afterward. The season wrapped up with an existential encounter when Arisu faced who he thought was the Joker. The guy explained that the Joker wasn't a person, but a reflection of endless possibilities between life and death. For Arisu, this confrontation was about finding meaning in every death that came before. The worst deaths mattered because they gave meaning to the choice of survival. Arisu's decision to keep living and save Usagi, even knowing more obstacles waited ahead, honored every sacrifice made along the way. What makes the brutal deaths in Alice in Borderland Season 3 so haunting is how they're packed with deeper meaning. Every game, every collapse, every sacrifice was more than just a visual treat. They exposed harsh truths about human nature, about fear, and about that fragile line between survival and complete annihilation. The Borderlands' cruelty was never just about violence. It was about forcing people to see themselves reflected in their darkest choices. Each death felt personal because of the implications left behind for whoever remained alive. Looking at that temple game again, those riddles that turned into fire traps didn't just kill randomly. They killed in a way that showed how knowledge and ignorance can literally mean life or death. The victims weren't weak or cowardly. Many were just unlucky, caught in riddles with no clear answers. The flames turned them to ash. But what really burned into the memory was how even intelligence couldn't save everyone. This was one of the worst death sequences because it destroyed the idea that skill alone could protect anyone in Borderland. Survivors watching people get incinerated over wrong answers carried scars deeper than any physical wounds. The zombie infection game cranked up that cruelty by turning cooperation into a death sentence. At first glance, the game seemed to encourage teamwork, but its structure guaranteed that trust would be punished. The worst moments came when players realized their friends were becoming carriers of death, unable to control infection that spread through simple touch. Fear of contamination made allies suspicious of each other, and violence broke out against the living rather than the undead. People got slaughtered before they even turned, sacrificed because of pure paranoia. These deaths were so chilling because they mirrored how fear can completely dismantle societies. Instead of fighting the game, players destroyed each other, proving that sometimes death comes faster when unity breaks apart. The subway game delivered deaths that were not just intimate, but inevitable, too. Poisoned air made every breath feel like a gamble, while masks only provided temporary relief. Death here was slow, suffocating, and personal. Watching others gasp for air, clawing at their throats as their lungs gave out, forced survivors to confront how fragile their own lives really were. By the time that final door game delivered the most emotionally devastating deaths of the entire season, there were buckets of trauma which would stick with our survivors forever. The final matchup demanded huge physical endurance, plus the willingness to sacrifice dreams and futures. When the dice said only 7 could pass, the group faced a choice with unbearable weight. For Usagi, her pregnancy symbolized hope for something beyond Borderland, but it also meant an additional life that changed the balance. Arisu's decision to stay behind was a kind of living form of death, conscious acceptance that he'd never see the future he fought for and helped create. That choice ripped at the season's heart, showing how the worst deaths are sometimes voluntary rather than forced. Sacrifice carries the same weight and finality as an organized execution, and Arisu's case revealed just how far Borderland would go to demand everything from people who refuse to give up. The cruelest twist came when even that sacrifice seemed pointless. The flood that swept through the outside world stole lives from players who'd endured everything, who'd clung to hope through impossible trials. Surviving every game only to drown in an uncontrollable torrent was the ultimate form of betrayal from an evil, vicious game. These weren't just random deaths. They showcased how fragile survival can be, how easily forces beyond control can undo everything. Usagi being carried off by the water was one of the most gut-wrenching images of the season, and the despair it left Arisu in made it even worse. The worst deaths aren't always permanent, though. Sometimes they're the moments when hope itself feels dead. Ryuji's end drove that point home even deeper. His collapse wasn't dramatic in a physical sense. It was the slow unraveling of a man crushed by guilt, by choices made and chances lost. Crawling toward death, unable to carry the weight of his mistakes, he showed the truth that death in Borderland isn't always about the body. Sometimes it's about the spirit and soul of a person itself. His final moments were tragic because they showed how a survivor can still be destroyed even after beating the odds stacked against them. For Ryuji, survival didn't mean freedom. It meant endless echoes of the past until death itself became the only release. Looking back at it all, the most brutal deaths of Alice in Borderland Season 3 weren't simply about violence from arrows, poison, floods, or explosions. They were about the crushing inevitability of loss, the weight of sacrifice, and how Borderland forces players to see death as both an enemy and a mirror. From the electrocutions that began the season to the floods that nearly ended it, every death carried a different shade of horror. Some were fast and merciless, others were drawn out and filled with agony. What united them was how they revealed the human condition under the most intense kinds of pressure. In the Borderland, death isn't only the end of life, it's the test of what people are willing to do and how far they'll go when survival is on the line. These deaths left a lasting imprint because of the emotional truths they uncovered, rather than just being shocking to watch because of their gore or brutality. They showed that life in the Borderland isn't simply about winning or losing games. It's about the intensely personal confrontation with mortality and the choices that define who survives long enough to see another day. Season 3 reminded viewers that in a world built on the edge of death, the worst endings are also the ones that give the living their purpose. As Arisu and Usagi carried their story back into the real world, every death along the way stood as both a warning and a legacy, shaping the fragile hope of a future that might finally escape Borderland's shadow. So these have been the worst deaths in Alice in Borderland Season 3. Do you agree with our picks? Or is there somebody you think we missed? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more Alice content and theories, click the video on screen now.